Silence is cancelled. Silence is cancelled. Silence is cancelled. Silence is cancelled. Welcome to Silence is Cancelled. In this episode, we're talking to Dr. Jackie Mack Harris, and we're going to lean into this concept of duality and how people can experience the same thing but believe and experience it in completely different ways. And then how do we then learn to appreciate somebody else's perspective and then respond to that perspective in a healthy way? Silence is canceled. Silence is canceled. It's February. It's Black History Month. And I had messaged you on Martin Luther King Day, and this is going to lead us to our conversation. I just felt, for the first time ever, I felt off. And I'm not, it was, I think, a culmination of the last 2 years and then of even what led us to this organization, George Floyd and all of that. And it was just kind of like, okay, here we are. and that led me, and I don't want to go like deep into that because we're, but then that led me to ask this question about duality. I began thinking about this in terms of, because there's even in the pandemic, there's people have very different, like complete opposite worldviews and complete opposite experiences of a pandemic or of racism or of Black history or so just because we're February and we're dealing with Black history, that was just on my mind of how people are perceiving or have perceived the history to now from two completely opposite or maybe more than two, but very, very different perspectives and understandings. And, well, this is why this is like this. Well, no, I experience it. I think it's like this. And it's like they have no connection at all, yet they're in the same world. And that kind of like ripped my brain apart a little bit. I think that's a pretty common phenomenon just in mental health in general. I'm curious what you think about that.
Oh, it's definitely a common phenomenon. I'm a couples therapist, and so that is my work every day. I'm a professor, and I teach at a Christian university in the counseling and psychology department. And so we have varying viewpoints. It's a Christian university, but not necessarily everyone who goes there comes in with the same viewpoint and perspective. And it's not a requirement that you're a Christian to attend. So we sit with people with varying views. I'm teaching psychopharmacology right now. And as I was reading through discussion posts yesterday, it was so great and a little daunting because there are so many varying perspectives. And I realized that when I work with couples that some of the distress in relationship is coming from these differing perspectives, right? One spouse says a particular thing happened and the other spouse says, no, that's not what happened. And now spouse number one feels like they're being called a liar. Spouse number two feels like, well, because you are lying. That's not what happened. And so my job is to help spouse two understand that they have a perspective, but it's not the only perspective. And that spouse number one has a perspective too. It's not the only perspective, but it is a perspective. And neither of them are necessarily wrong. They're coming from different vantage points. And so sometimes I will have my couple stand up in a room. And so if they're standing up in my office, I'll have them face each other. And I will tell them, don't turn your head, but from right where you're standing, looking at each other, describe the room as you see it. Well, if they're facing each other, they're looking in opposite directions. They're going to share with me different things because they see different things. And I usually say, well, so who's lying? Who's wrong? Who got it wrong? Who's making it up? Who's exaggerating? Who's being dramatic? Who's putting too much on it? Because these are, all these things that we say when what someone else is experiencing doesn't make sense to us. And I have some couples that the work doesn't progress because one or the other cannot get past the fact that their perspective is not the only perspective. And I mean, I get it. Our perspective is what we are experiencing in our body, right? What I'm hearing and feeling and thinking is different than what you're hearing and feeling and thinking. But it is arrogance for us to think that everyone has to think and feel and experience the world in the same way that we do. And we don't talk a lot about that. And there are people in the world who, there's one right way and a wrong way. And if you don't do it my way, you're wrong. And so when we think about like race and diversity and equity and inclusion and all the things that, we've been talking about over the past couple of years and trying to create more change in this country, some people have a really hard time with it because from their perspective, things are good. Things aren't the way that they used to be. And Black people are doing well. Brown people are doing well. We're not in slavery anymore. Get over it. You should move on. Well, while I am doing well,
right.
That's me. I had some hurdles, but I'm doing well. I have my own type of privilege based on my education. And so I am doing well based on growing up in a home with two parents. There is a certain privilege that goes along with that. And I do have a perspective that is different than other Black women who I know because we don't live in the same bodies. But I definitely have a different perspective and lived experience than you have as a white man. And you realize that. And you can like stand in that space and be okay knowing that you don't know everything. And knowing that just because you don't know everything, that doesn't make you somehow bad or less valuable. Your experience still matters and your experience is still important and it's still true and real. Me having an experience different than yours doesn't diminish your experience. And sometimes when I sit with people, that's what I hear and feel, that somehow we believe that if you are telling me your experience and it doesn't match mine, then something's wrong with me. And that's not okay. So I'm going to make sure that it's you that there's something wrong with. You're the problem. You're not seeing it correctly. You're exaggerating. You're making things up. You're being too sensitive. You know, all the things that we say to make it okay when people are not okay, but to make it okay for ourselves.
So what's the first, what's the first step somebody can, or that somebody would need to take in order to start seeing that other perspective, or like they don't, and I'm assuming you don't even have to agree with it, or you just have to acknowledge that it's there, or what, like what's that first step?
And that is really hard. The first step is just to validate the other person's experience. You can be curious. And so I would say something like, that's an interesting perspective. Can you say more? And I know that that's very therapist-y, but we use it because it works, right? It's me indicating to you that I want to know more about what you're saying. We don't have.
I would pull back that it's like therapeutic. It's more just language. It's learning how to have conversations, which is a whole other podcast, but I think we've lost that. It's a whole other thing.
A whole other podcast. I was just about to say that. I was like, that's a thing we don't do well. So I get that people struggle there because we don't
send you
like
a tweet of 29 characters because that's all I can do. I can't have long conversations. So
right. And definitely not if you're going to disagree with me, or if I'm afraid something I'm going to say is going to be in disagreement with you and you're going to get offended. So then I don't want to say anything. And that's why we struggle with this duality.
Is it because we don't know how to hear or receive that which is not, which we don't like?
We don't like the way it feels, right? Our body responds to this. So someone says, oh yeah, I told you that. And you say, no, you never told me that. And they're like, yeah, I did. Remember? And they start describing a story and you can't remember it. What starts to happen inside? You start to feel like something's wrong with you. I am bad. I forgot. It triggers all of your old stuff about not passing the test, getting in trouble when your parents ask you a question and you say, I don't know. Like all that stuff comes up in you, not knowing, not being good enough, just simply because someone is asking you about a conversation you don't remember having with them. It just triggers all of the shame and the I'm bad. And so when we start to fight back, that couldn't have happened. I would remember. Well, there's lots of things that happen around us that we don't actually have awareness of because we're not tuned into it. And so I've learned to not to say that's not true, that didn't happen, even if I strongly believe that, because I might have just missed it. My husband may have told me and I wasn't tuned in at the time. Was I on the phone? Was I reading something? Was I in conversation with someone else? Did I respond back to you? Did I mirror back to you what you said? So I can tell if someone is tuned in to what I'm saying. If when I share something, they say, so let me make sure I understand you. And they mirror that back with me. So that's one thing you can do. Someone shares something with you and it's not making sense to you. It doesn't feel true or right to you, rather than shoot it down and end the conversation and cause disconnection. Why not lean into it? Let's enhance this connection and be curious. Okay, let me make sure I'm understanding you. Then you mirror back what they said and then say, elaborate for me. Say a little more. I'm not necessarily following you, or this doesn't really resonate with me. And so tell me a little more. Help me see it from your perspective. Help me understand your perspective. What this does is I'm acknowledging to myself, I don't get it, but I'm not letting myself get sucked down into shame and not being good enough just because I'm not connecting with what you're saying. But I'm not disconnecting from the conversation either. I'm leaning in. I'm asking for more so that I can understand you. I want to empathize with your perspective, but we don't do empathy well in this country. And so since we don't empathize well, we don't understand the other person's perspective, because in order to empathize, you have to be able to use your empathic imagination to kind of feel what that other person must be feeling or what they would experience. Not if they were you, but being who they are, being in the situation they are, with their story, their history, their needs and wants and dreams and hopes, with them being them, what must this be like for them? And if I know a person and I see them in struggle, then I can say, oh, wow, that must be really hard for you, because I'm considering some of these things and considering having maybe I know what it's like to be in that kind of struggle. So I can reach down inside of me and connect with something that connects with your experience. It might not be the same exact thing, but I've suffered in a similar way. And so I'm going to reach down and connect with that and imagine what you must be going through. But we don't use our imaginations. We don't think outside of our own experience. We don't use our imagination well for others, right? For me to imagine what something must be like for you is really hard. And I think we believe it takes something away from our own experience. That's how we respond to it anyway. Like somehow your experience being different than mine endangers my experience. And that's just not true. So I shared on Facebook, I had a conversation with someone. And so I shared some of our family experience with being pulled over by the police unnecessarily, which we call, driving while black. My husband having police draw down on him while he is roofing. He's a roofer. It's his job. What do you mean? What are you doing up here on the roof? And having had that happen a couple of times, an experience he had, in, maybe the past 8 years, where he was saying, boy, you ain't supposed to be around these parts at this time of night, as he's working a roofing job in Texas, right? So I'm sharing these experiences that we've had in a conversation about racism. And the man who I'm sharing this with is a white man. And his response to me is, Well, I'm sorry for what your family and you experienced, but you've been brainwashed. Racism does not exist in America. The fact that you think you can tell me that is a problem. But he couldn't tolerate my experience, even though I shared from what I was experiencing and not labeling everybody as bad, but here's what I experienced. This does happen. And he could say, yeah, I'm sorry that happened, but it's not real. Because he has never been in that situation. He will never be a Black man who has the police pull up on him and ask, what is he doing while he's working his job? And because he can never be that, he's not ever experienced that. It doesn't even make sense that anyone would do that. So he can't fathom it because that just isn't going to happen. Well, no, it's not going to happen to you. And that's because, as a white person, you don't think about being white when you walk outside of the house. You just walk out. So my experience will never make sense. And I don't expect it to. I don't need it to. But if we're going to have a conversation, I need you to at least be able to acknowledge that my experience could be different than your experience. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It won't.
Yeah.
But what I won't, I no longer am willing to tolerate someone else telling me it's not what I think it is and me letting that ride. Because I used to just not care enough to care and say, okay, well, whatever. But I realized that doesn't help the problem because silence is complicity. And people of color can be complicit in this problem, just like white people can be complicit in this problem. And we sit silently and we don't share our perspective. And so then people remain ignorant of these various experiences and perspectives. And they don't know that there are people here, that Black people come in all different shapes, sizes, and personalities. There isn't just one way to be Black, but we've kind of created a perspective. So even within culture, there is a idea that this is the way you do it. And so, of course, if we go outside of culture, we're going to have challenges because if people even within the culture can't agree that this is how we are because we're not all the same, then, of course, people cross cultures aren't going to be able to agree. So what I want people to challenge themselves to do is to be able to stand in the discomfort of not knowing another person's experience and be curious about it. Just be curious. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to make sense of it. You don't have to change it, fix it.
Yeah. But there's
just
a
be curious.
Yeah, there's
enough to be curious.
Humanity and just being open to listening, right?
Well, in humanity. Humanity, though, right? One of the things that I think happens is that we stop seeing what we don't understand as human.
As something else.
And so then we see it as other. And if it's other, then we can make it what we want it to be because it's not a human being, right? Like people know that humans are all different and we vary. But when we treat certain people in certain classes, ethnicities, differently, we treat them as less than human, then we don't give them we don't give them permission for that whole full range of experiences. No, you're Black, you do this.
Yeah.
This is what it's like to be
There's
Black.
that famous quote of, I can't think of it specifically, but every person you meet is fighting a battle that you can't see. And while they might not be fighting a battle, it depends on the particular person, but there's always you can't know all the things about a person just from meeting them. Right? I mean, imagine if somebody if somebody knew all of your stuff, they would have to follow you 24/7, every minute, it's not possible. And so
and some people think that they should be able to have that information, right? If we're good together, if we're meant to be together, we should know everything. We treat celebrities like that, like we think we know
that's
everything
a whole
about
other.
them.
I could go down that rabbit hole.
A whole other podcast.
Yeah. But essentially, if you're watching this and you are, you're in that place either as somebody frustrated that somebody doesn't understand you, or somebody frustrated that you don't understand. um, there are tools, right? There are tools for that.
There are tools, and there's simple communication tools. There's some really good books out there that can help with this. If you're really just wanting to try to understand the brain, and you've got kids at home, and kids lie, and that's not how that happened, and your kid's not always lying. Sometimes you just don't believe them because you can't fathom what they experience. Whole Brain Child by Dan Siegel is a great book to help understand the brains of children. But I also think it helps us understand just the human brain. And so it's good for adults as well. Anything Brene Brown, but in particular, Dare to Lead is a book I'm reading right now. And I think it covers a lot out of her books, Daring Greatly. And I think the other one is Rising Strong. But Daring Greatly for sure and Dare to Lead are books that have these steps in them to help have some hard conversations. And those tools can help in every relationship, whether it's a work relationship, whether you're trying to have a hard conversation with a stranger you just met on the street, whether it's your partner, your child, family members, because lots of families are struggling right now to have some hard conversations and to manage these differing perspectives. So, it is Black History Month, and so we're talking about race and ethnicity, but we also, we have religious differences. We have just, political differences, and families are being torn apart because they can't tolerate the other's perspective. And so we have to be more compassionate with one another and realize, just like it's hard for you to throw out your perspective as fake and false, it would be hard for that other person.
Which is fascinating, because basically what you're saying is families are not being torn apart because they have differences. They're being torn apart because they don't know what to do with those differences, which is a whole different, it's a whole different thing, which also gives, I think, at least for me, for sure today, that gave me just a little bit of hope. I was like, oh, so I can have the differences and still be fine. It's just about how you approach them.
And in this country, historically, we've not liked the idea of having differences. Think about how we talk about the country being a melting pot. What happens when you melt things together? They lose all of their own properties and characteristics. And now it all becomes this one new thing, right? Where fondue? No, I'd rather be salad bowl, right? If you go to a salad bowl, you've got all these distinct ingredients that hold their shape and their texture and their flavor, and they're all unique. And that isn't all mushed up and pureed together, and then we get salad soup. No,
and covered in chocolate to remove all of the taste from whatever it is that was there in the first place.
Exactly, right?
Oh.
And so let's just allow people to be who they are, and let's come together as this wonderful, healthy salad, rather than, throw everything in a pot and melt it down and become this really kind of gross and unhealthy goop of fondue, right? Like I never understood the melting pot analogy. Like, who wants to do that? And that's what we've tried to do in this country. And that's why people can't tolerate other perspectives, because we've been told that there should only be one, the American way. And the American way, if successful, is you having the culture that you have in your family and that expanding out into the world, whatever you bring to the world, me having the culture that I have in mine and that expanding out to whatever that is. Everybody needs to figure out who they are and what their culture is, what meaning for life is for them, and bring it to the party. What we try to do is influence how people are, and so that people are all a particular type of, right? Men, good men do this. good women do this, good Christians do this, a good, executive, entrepreneur. We have all these categories that we put people in, and we've decided what the standard is. And if you don't fit into that standard, something's wrong with you. And the reality is something's wrong with most of us because we're trying to fit into that standard. We're trying to put square pegs in round holes. And we have to stop trying to force people to be what we want them to be and allow people to be what they are, who they are created to be. Then we would have less divorce because we won't have so many young people getting married because the church told them they had to. We won't have so many fights about race and equity and diversity because we'll just understand that race is a construct somebody came up with to make sense of differences and then started to use that against us. And if we stop allowing difference to be used against us and we start to lean into it and see it as an asset, and we gain so much. Our organization is comprised of so much diversity. We are so varied where we live, what we all do, how we look, our ethnicities, our marital status, children. We are all so different. And yet we complement one another and we work together well. It doesn't mean we always agree on every single thing, but all of our perspectives in a way through matter. We want to hear everybody's voice. And then we take all that information and we come up with what's best for us to move forward. No one perspective overrules another. All matters. And then we just have to, we take all the information and we make the best informed decision we can. So that's what I tell my couples. That's what I tell people when I'm in my multicultural class, when I'm having hard conversations about race and about the history of this country. All the perspectives matter. And what we've done now is we've gathered more information. We have my perspective, we have your perspective. Now we can make better decisions going forward because now we know what is needed from both angles, not just what is needed from what I would say as a Black woman in her early 50s, right?
Own it. It's fine.
What I might say might be different. I'm here. Everybody didn't make it to 54. I'm going to count every year. But I think we need to talk more about talking more and being okay with the differences.
Because we are all different. There's no,
we are all different, and that's what makes us beautiful.
I'm glad not everybody's like me. That would be just really boring. It would be
right. And like I tell my Christian clients that really have a hard time with this, go back and read the Gospels. It's 4 versions of a scene that happens, and they're all different. And Christians are really serious about the Bible and it being true and right. Well, how is it possible that all these different perspectives of this one event happened? Who's wrong? Who lied? Who made a mistake? If it's possible there, then why can't it be possible in your church? Why can't it be possible in your home? Why can't it be possible on your job? A conversation you're having with someone in the mall. Varying perspectives matter. And the best thing we can do is stop having expectations of other people and think that those expectations that we have should trump their own expectations for themselves, and recognize and value various perspectives. And we do that by being curious. Tell me more about that. Help me understand your viewpoint. Just be curious and mind your body. Your body is going to react to it, but just because your body's having a reaction to it doesn't mean that other person is bad or wrong. It just means you don't like this information. So learn to tolerate things you don't like. It's kind of like having to eat peas when you're a kid.
Or when you're an adult. What do you mean? As a kid, what are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Or when you're an adult, right? Or when you're an adult.
Put peas on my plate. They will all be there when I'm done eating. What are you talking about? Anyway. Thanks for listening to this episode of Silence is Canceled. To join the conversation or share your story or learn more about the work we are doing, please connect with us on Facebook or Instagram at waythru.org. That's WAYTHRUORG, or visit us on our website at waythru.org. You matter, your story matters. Let's all help each other find a way through.